conflicts if neither stands down. Back here, the government is exercising much caution and will not even comment on the matter. But how will the Philippines be affected by the friction? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama ko po online, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Ami, good evening.
Good evening.
Ano bang tinitingnan natin na balita?
Well, bumisita na yung dalawang presidente for the late President FVR kanina. President Marcos and former President Duterte nandun. And si VP Lenny din, former Vice President Lenny, nandun din sila.
And interesting, I was looking at the footage earlier, President Bongbong Marcos in particular, actually acknowledging sabi niya, yung mga kaguluhan ng 1986.
Yes.
But that's just to basically also acknowledge na sabi niya nga, noong 1992, when President FVR became president, na sinabi niya one legacy of FVR is in fact that he brought stability to the nation pagkatapos ng mga kagaluhan noong 1986. Sabi ni President Marcos.
Well, si FVR din naman, I think, paved the way for the return of the Marcoses here. At saka, sinasabi din yun ng mga Marcoses, kamag-anak nila yan, second cousin yan.
That's right.
Uncle of the president.
And to your point, diba, it's interesting, of course, in Philippine politics, in many ways, in so many levels, a lot of things just keep going around and coming around, and we see a lot of the same elements over and over again. But anyway, in the meantime, today, let's talk about something going on a little bit outside of our borders, but clearly having implications for the Philippines. Speaking of President Bongbong Marcos, he's still being very measured about this matter. Let's bring in another voice to this discussion. De La Salle University International Studies Professor Renato De Castro joins us via Zoom. Good evening, Professor. Welcome back to The Chiefs.
Good evening. Thank you very much for bringing me back and giving me the opportunity to express my views regarding this really pressing issue.
Pressing ba ang adjective? Would you use any other adjective to describe what's going on in Taiwan? We are of course, talking about Nancy Pelosi's visit to our neighbor to our north, and Beijing not being very happy about this. How else would you describe this?
Well, we're sitting beside a potentially active volcano. That's the metaphor I use. You know, being an archipelagic country, we're familiar with volcanoes, and we know how it is to be sitting or living beside a volcano that could possibly erupt at any moment in time.
But let me use another metaphor, powder keg. Because at least ang volcano, yung iba, ang hirap basahin, it's organic, it can happen anytime. But Pelosi's visit, people are saying, adds another layer because it could actively trigger something here. Do you agree there?
Well, it could be a triggering, but of course, what I would call the structure of this powder keg was, of course, generated last decade, around 2013, 2014, during that time. And this has something to do with the declaration of President Xi Jinping. He announced, that it's time for China to end the long civil war that began in 1928. That, it's still continuing. The fact that China, you have, of course, Communist China, mainland China being ruled by the Communist Party. And of course, in 1949, the Gumindang was pushed into Taiwan, which of course created what we call this cross-straits crisis that has been there since 1949. It's remained basically stable until, of course, when President Xi Jinping became the president of China, he finally announced, it's time that we have to end this. And of course, he means unification either by through peaceful means or, of course, through force.
Well, China conducted military drills today, no, including live fire exercises. But it's not the first time they did that, no?
Yes.
And at this point, can China afford to go into a shooting war? It's still
Yes.
dealing with the COVID pandemic within the mainland.
Yeah, for
We
the
still
communist.
have that
Yeah, for the
Russian-Ukraine crisis.
Well, the Russian-Ukraine crisis provides opportunity for China to divide the attention of the United States. The United States and, of course, NATO are currently focused on the Ukraine-Russia crisis. So
Can they
this
afford
actually,
it? Yun ang problema. Can they afford it? I mean, hindi lang naman tayo naghihirap dito sa mundong ngayon.
they can. This is because we have to understand, this is not an issue of material capability. This is an issue of ideology. This is an issue of nationalism. For the Communist Party, it is a sacred mission for the Chinese Communist Party to end the civil war, at this point in time. At the time that China has the second largest economy, and they have already built up the naval and air capabilities to effect what they would consider their historic mission to finally reunify the motherland.
But they also have to consider the resistance, the capability for resistance. And Taiwan is not alone.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Taiwan
but-
is backed by the United States. That's the
But,
problem here, no?
But of course, you have to take into account the calculation of the Chinese. For them, what is crucial, and we go back to Mao Zedong. Remember, Xi Jinping is a Maoist. And the Maoist thinking regarding war is that human will prevails over material weapons.
Okay. Now, in the meantime, paano naman tayo na nandito sa neighborhood na to? Both the Philippines and for that matter, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, even before crafting any message, and like we said, they've been very, very careful about that, other than just to say, oh, steady lang muna, wala munang kikilos. But who do they even turn to? Who do they prioritize? Who do they talk to, other than saying both? Is any message for sobriety better targeted to Washington, in particular after Pelosi's actions, or is it more constructive to try to craft some kind of a message towards Beijing?
I will refer to Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. National Security Advisor, who he said, at certain moment, inaction might be the best recourse. Simply because you cannot control the situation. We simply don't have the capability to control the situation.
Okay,
So rather than make it worse, the best thing to do is just sit still and weigh things before you take any, at least you state any position, much more, of course, take any action.
Okay, and we have not taken any position, but I mean, to that point, the no comment stance right now, and pag-aralan lang muna natin, that's as far as the Philippine government can go, you think?
Let me use a precedent. And this has something to do also with the late President Fidel V. Ramos when the first crisis happened in March 1996. When Taiwan held its first democratic election and China fired missiles across the Taiwan Strait. This was also the time, this is March 1996. In around November 1995, U.S. Defense Secretary Perry was warned by his Chinese counterpart, are you willing to have Seattle and, of course, L.A. burned in a nuclear fire? So we also see this rhetoric. So during that time, if you would remember, then President Bill Clinton sent 2 carrier battle groups around Taiwan. We were also paralyzed. I could still remember this. Even during that time when you have, of course, indirect messages being directed by the Clinton administration for the possible use of Clark and Subic, just in case you have a shove and push situation. The Philippine government during the time of FDR was also paralyzed.
Oh, but should it come to that? And of course, people are already talking about, okay, Subic and Clark again. When it comes to if it comes to that point, what do we say? I mean, in other words, how tenable and sustainable is this not taking a position, not saying anything, keeping your head low? We understand it completely, the wisdom behind it, but how sustainable is that when at a
We just
certain
have to
point, as
wait.
you said,
We still have to wait. That's where we wait things until, of course, again, we would be involved in this. I definitely will be involved with it, but at this point in time, it's better that we just stay still. In action, the term used by Henry Kissinger, sometimes the best recourse is in action.
Well, under the Mutual Defense Treaty, what are we obligated to get
If
to the fray in case something
If
has
it
to
will be
involve-
invoked, but it has to be invoked.
It has to be invoked.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're always thinking that we would invoke it if you have a push comes to shove in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
So in this situation, I don't think it will be the Philippines that will be invoking the Mutual
Yes.
Defense Treaty. But also we have to take into account an alliance is a two-way street.
Yes.
Yeah, you cannot basically, you expect your ally to assist you, then you will tell your ally, I'll be neutral.
Yes.
That will be a great blow to our credibility.
You're saying we cannot afford not to get involved if the MDT is involved.
Yes.
But you actually expect this to develop into a armed confrontation.
My area security studies.
Yes.
I teach security studies. In security studies, you always look at the worst case scenario. If you are in defense, if you are in the National Security Council, if you are in intelligence community, and probably even if you are in the diplomatic corps, this training is always think in terms of the worst case scenario. But of course, always hoping that it would not happen.
Yes, because Beijing for the longest time has been saying, since it started upgrading its military capability, it's been saying there's nothing to be afraid of. This is a peaceful rise. We are just upgrading to match our economic capabilities. Do you believe in that peaceful rise of China under Xi?
No. The statement of peaceful rise was earlier than Xi Jinping.
Yes, that's
This
before.
was
yes.
President Hu Jintao.
Yes.
And they also abide by the principle of Deng Xiaoping.
Yes.
Hide your shyness. Hide your sword. Everything has changed since President Xi Jinping.
that's right.
They don't use anymore the rhetoric of peaceful rise, peaceful emergence, and they have basically done away with the advice of the late Deng Xiaoping. Always hide your shyness. Not anymore.
And certainly the personality of Premier Xi Jinping has also evolved over the past few years. I mean, referring to the earlier crisis that you said, until this time, China didn't have, in effect, a president for life as they have now in Xi Jinping. And he certainly has been much more, let's say, much more assertive in his own stature in the region and the world. What might that suggest for scenarios playing around in your mind?
And in fact, probably that's the reason why he asked that position. Because his role, from his perspective, from probably, of course, able to convince the Politburo, and in fact, the entire Communist Party, we have to give the leader this, lifetime term as president of China, as the Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, because we finally found someone who was there to fulfill this historic mission. A mission that not even the late Chairman Mao Zedong was not able to fulfill during his lifetime. Mao Zedong tried, of course, to effect this unification. I don't know if you remember in the 1950s, until, of course, the President Dwight Eisenhower ordered the Seventh Fleet to intercede, between mainland China and, of course, Taiwan during the 1956-1957 Quemoy-Matsu crisis.
Now,
Yeah.
Professor,
So-
you have made a distinction between the White House on the one hand, the executive in the United States, and Nancy Pelosi representing the U.S. Congress. So because of separation of powers, you have made that distinction. And the White House in particular calls this, so far, yesterday, that was their statement. This is just, this is not, they didn't say just, but they did call it saber rattling. And they said, we will not get pulled into saber rattling. But is that underestimating how far Beijing may push this, given that there really has been no other situation that has pushed them this far into really showing how far they will go?
Well, again, the United States is trying to show the world that our approach is measured, unlike China, who is making it appear that it's simply so agitated. So it's trying to show to the world, yeah, we were put in this situation because, the President Biden could not control the action of Speaker Pelosi because of the separation of power. But eventually, of course, they're forced to act by deploying a carrier battle group not very far from Taiwan, although they refuse to admit that the USS Ronald Reagan carrier battle group is in the Philippine Sea, in the Pacific area, just on a routine mission. But, definitely it's a measured effort. But I cannot imagine what preparations are being done right now in the Indo-PACOM area. Watching everything. It's there, They have the capabilities. But at this point in time, they're trying to show the world, in contrast to China, our approach would be rational. Our approach should be measured. It will be a calculated response to China's, all-out, hysteria, if I may use the term.
But considering what's at stake for China and considering the importance of face for Beijing, you think the response is also not measured? It's also, I think, as far as they are concerned, it's a measured response. They're not yet invading Taiwan.
Well, of course, but you look at the action, conducting 5 military exercises around Taiwan, sending the message we could effect a effective, a blockade, a naval blockade of Taiwan, showing we have the capability.
Well, they didn't put a blockade in place. That's something, diba? If they really want,
yeah, but ships in place.
if they don't react forcefully to this, if they don't issue a strong reaction, I think they're worried that it might be followed up by more visits from the rest of the world. You have to also consider how Beijing
You sure? But
thinks about setting a precedent for the rest of the world if it doesn't react and show its displeasure.
Also, there's a domestic politic dimension there.
Yes.
President Xi Jinping has simply lost his face to the party, to the military, and to the Chinese people because of the way they conducted this saber rattling measures.
Yes.
Okay, now, if should it come to a major blockade on Taiwan, and that is in a very crucial spot for international navigation, what does that do for freedom of navigation, not just for the Philippines, but for the whole world, given that this is a heavily trafficked area when it comes to transnational shipments?
First of all, if it's a blockade, if China would conduct a blockade, that would be an act of war. So expect, Taiwan to react. And as an island republic, Taiwan would have to ensure that the sea lanes of communication remain open because it's a trading nation, just like Japan. And also, I think Japan would react. Of course, Japan has already indicated that the Japanese government just came out with a defense white paper where they mentioned that they have also vital security interests in Taiwan. Interestingly, Japan is so quiet. Probably it's just allowing following the cue from the United States. It should be measured reaction, calibrated reaction. Yeah, that's of course my reaction there is we're heading into the unthinkable situation that could trigger a major conflict in the region.
but how much influence might the international community bring to Beijing? I mean, it won't ignore the message, for example, from the ASEAN, even if it's not the European Union, but it's right there within the neighborhood, right?
Well, again, for China, this is a historic mission. They couldn't care less. What is important is how they redeem their pride in the eyes of the Chinese people, in the eyes of the People's Liberation Army, in the eyes of the People's Liberation Army's Navy, and of course the Air Force, and of course the party members.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Professor, what's the best case scenario?
Things will slow down, things will calm down, but I guess this will just be this will just be an armistice. There'll be future crisis because of the basic structure right now. The global society has changed since the Russian-Ukraine invasion. I guess I'm old enough to remember the Cold War. It's just like we're back circa Cold War situation where, quoting Mao Zedong, a single spark would start a prairie fire. A single incident could trigger, Hopefully it will not come to that situation. But, as a survivor of the Cold War, he cannot help. But remember what happened, what transpired during the Cold War.
Okay. Professor Renato De Castro of the De La Salle University, maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good evening,
Professor.
everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you po. And we'll start up another conversation after the break. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back, the Chiefs. Abuse and exploitation against children have become rampant on social media. Now, a measure which aims to make cyberspace safe for children has lapsed into law. To talk about this, we have with us Save the Children spokesperson April Correa. Welcome to the program, Ms. Correa.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, ha.
Hello. Ma'am, the Anti-Online Sexual Abuse and Exploitations of Children Bill has lapsed into law, has been enacted. Just remind everyone in what this law effectively gives us by way of protecting our children.
Yes, good evening, ho. Republic Act 11930 is called an act punishing online sexual abuse or exploitation of children, penalizing the production, distribution, possession, and access of child sexual abuse or exploitation materials. So, sir, basically, this law details kung ano po ang defines kung ano po ang tinatawag nating online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, ano po ang punishable acts under this law, and ano po ang duties and responsibilities of mandated agencies. This also includes what kind of services that victim survivors should receive under this law.
So let's back up a bit. What did we have before, prior to this act? What did we have by way of, let's call it limited, but whatever we had, what did we have by way of protecting our minors, our children online? And what specifically are those crimes that become more punishable and penalties that become harder and stronger?
Yes. Dati po, meron naman po tayong existing laws protecting children from sexual abuse and exploitation. In particular, we have Republic Act 9775 or Anti-Child Pornography. OSAIC is also punishable before under Republic Act 10364 or the Anti-Child Trafficking Law. However, sir, there are already gaps in this law na nakita namin because since technology is ever evolving, meron na po mga certain aspects of how children are abused right now na hindi nasaklaw ng mga batas na ito. Hence, we saw the need for a new law na makaka-cover talaga ng maayos kung ano yung mga na-experience ng mga bata ngayon, yung mga harms that they are exposed to online. So this covers, the law covers this. And then, by kasama ho natin sa batas na ito na magpapatupad yung ating stakeholders, especially from the private sectors, who can help us through their businesses protect children online.
Ang pagkaalam namin noon, you wanted accountability from the social media platforms. Kasama ba yan dyan sa bagong batas na yan?
Yes, ma'am. Definitely, ma'am. Kasama po ito. In fact, duty ho ng internet intermediaries na sila ho ay dapat immediately mag-block ng access or ng link to take down URLs or links of any content na sexual in nature at maaaring may bata na involved. So kasama ko yun sa duties nila as stakeholder dito. Kasi although we file reports to social media companies, for example, kaya lang hindi pa rin ganun kaagad yung pag-prevent. No? We see Facebook groups, for example, or YouTube channels that stay on for so long and have garnered so many subscribers. So abuse has already has long gone on. So dapat po ito mas maaga na pagtuunan ng pansin ng social media.
May penalty ba yan kapag hindi nakakomply yung platform? Kasi medyo malawak yung kakailanganin nila ng maraming tao magmo-monitor, no? Under the law, hindi lang, even if there's no complaint, di ba? Kailangan on their own, they will be monitoring their platforms?
Opo, kasama ho na dapat naaayon ho sa child protection. Kasama ho dapat lagi sa kanilang business principles or business standards yung child protection. So meron din dapat a proactive action from our partners. Hindi lang kung kailan may report sana.
So ano yung penalty pag hindi sila nakakomply? Kasi medyo mahirap yung compliance dyan. Paanong penalty
Well, for now, the penalty based po sa nabasa ko so far sa law focuses more on the those who produce sexual abuse and exploitation materials, mas taas pa lang ang focus. Those who coerce children to be online and be nude and do sexual acts. So mas nasa kanila po yung penalty.
Nabanggit niyo po kanina that this new law plugs some gaps, fills in some gaps. And I imagine ito ngang making the social media platforms more accountable is one of those gaps. Ano pa po? What are other examples of gaps na natutunan natin, nalaman natin from the previous laws na hopefully this new law helps to fill in?
Meron ho ditong nag-update ho ng definition of terms na wala sa 9775. Meron na, kasi dati 9775 only focuses on the material, the distribution. Pero ngayon ho, kasama na sa bagong batas sa punishable na ho yung pag-groom sa bata to quote-unquote convince them na maghubad in front of the camera. So may mga ganun hong provisions na naidagdag sa law. Meron na rin ho, actually the law for the longest time, wala kasing definition of OSAE. The term was coined, pero this law already provides a definition of what it is. So it's with the technology, talagang kung ano ho yung mga laws natin dati are not, hindi na lahat ay applicable sa nangyayari.
Ang problema dyan ngayon, as in the previous law, is the proper implementation. We've had sessions on this problem before at sinasabi nga nila yung mga stakeholders, isang malaking problema the parents themselves and guardians themselves are the ones who are exploiting the children. Paano kaya yung remedyo dyan kapag ganyan? With this new law, ano yung madadagdag na capabilities?
For this law, may emphasis ho ang prevention. Kaya nga ho, kami sa Save the Children, we emphasize na ang prevention ay hindi lang dapat pagturo sa mga bata, but also involving the parents. Kasi they have first and foremost the responsibility to keep their children safe online. Kasi yun naman ang laging sinasabi from the news, the parents force their children to do so because of poverty, ganito, ganyan. Oo.
Well, sa nakikita niyo with the new law, ano yung nakikita niyo medyo mahirap i-implement na portion dyan? Yung medyo problematic siya.
I wouldn't say problematic, Ma'am Ami, but from a personal point of view, dahil hindi ako masyadong maalam on how technology works, sa ngayon pa lang, sometimes I try to imagine paano kaya yun na at the onset, hindi pa kumakalat ang isang harmful content na shut down na siya agad. Yun yung question na tumatakbo sa isip ko. Kasi very challenging talaga yun. Kasi there are millions of subscribers who upload a lot of content. So, mas yun yung question ko. Paano kaya yun gagawin ng ating mga partners from social media platforms? Mas ganun po yung question ko.
Now, in the meantime, let's talk about, the root of the problem itself. We've been talking about the law, hopefully what we can do, but bring us up to date on OSAIC, and we keep mentioning OSAIC. We should spell it out for everyone. That's online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, or OSAIC.
Children.
But what do we understand about that problem right now? Sino typically ang perpetrators? Are they in the country? Are they outside the country? And in terms of prevention, gaya nga ng sabi mo, other than this law, what else can we do to prevent it?
OSAIC ho is an issue that has long gone on. No? Before the term was even coined, nangyayari na siya. Ang predators who usually nito, sir, are foreigners. Ito yung mga nasa kabilang side of the camera. Sadly, the facilitators, as we call them, are parents, or kung hindi man parents, trusted adults ng mga bata. Lately, our partners from the DSWD have rescued cases wherein peer-to-peer, kung sino kaibigan na mismo ng isang bata ang nagtuturo sa kanya kung paano gawin ito. And sadly, the victims have become younger. Meron ng nare-rescue less than a year old. There was a recent rescue from one of our areas who's as young as 7 years old. So, ganun po yung nangyayari. Kasi lagi nga sinasabi, we need this to earn money, we need this to buy food or to sustain us. Kaya lang, OSAIC provides fast and easy money at the expense of the safety and the dignity of the child. And dahil mas matimbang para sa mga facilitators na ito ang kumita, they are willing to forgo that and abuse the child.
Para ang hirap pakinggan ng lahat ng nito, no? But in terms of what we understand about it, you've mentioned some anecdotal situations. Pero sa pangkalahatan, do we have an idea of how big this problem is? We know how many get rescued, but do we have any idea of how many the victims actually are?
At the level, ang alam ho natin na datos from Save the Children ay specific to from the areas that we work with, sir. Yun ho yung mga na-rescue na mga children from entrapment operations. However, tumaas ho ang cases ng cyber tips na natanggap ng Department of Justice when the pandemic started. So, from 400,000 in 2019, lumobo ito to around 1.2 million cyber tips in 2020.
Wow.
So pag cyber tips po, mga reports that a content could be sexually abusive or exploitative na may kinalaman sa bata.
Well, speaking of rescuing, isa pang problema na na-raise na, and I think it's been raised for a couple of years now. Pag nire-rescue yung mga bata, wala naman daw mapagdalhan na pwede silang, parang wala tayong foster home system, di ba? Unless meron mga kamag-anak who are willing to take them in. Nag-improve na ba yung capability natin to provide this kind of post-traumatic care sa ganitong mga victims of child abuse? Paano kung magulang mismo ang involved, di ba? In fact, yung iba nga daw mga bata umiiyak eh. Pag hinihiwalay dun sa magulang, kahit exploited sila eh.
Oo, that's true, Ma'am Ami. Our partner social workers saying na yung mga bata upon rescue, nakaka-experience rin sila ng trauma. Kasi hindi nila naiintindihan bakit sila hinihiwalay sa parents nila. Kasi the parents have already manipulated them into thinking that what they are doing is okay. Kasi you are helping the family, may pagkain tayo, may pampaaral sa'yo. In that case, unfortunately, the child has to be pulled out. Kasi si parent mismo ang involved. Ang DSWD ho ay may shelters for these children. Meron din hong mga civil society organizations who are accredited to run shelters for these children. Yun nga lang ho, I wouldn't say, I don't think I'm in the position to say whether nag-improve ba yung yung status. But sa nakikita natin, may kakulangan talaga kasi lagi at lagi may nare-rescue. And limited rin yung capacities for now.
But to give us a more idea on the resources that we will need, which government agencies in particular will feel the burden, the responsibility, as well as the gaps in implementing this? I imagine DSWD, NBI, ano-anong mga ahensya ang involved dito?
DSWD ho, DOJ, NBI, yung ating mga local PNP, yung ating local government, of course, kasi sila po ang may malaking papel din sa pagtulong to prevent and respond to this issue. So actually lahat po ng stakeholders ay even before the law was lapsed into law, medyo mabigat na ho talaga dahil hindi ho biro yung pag-investigate and then yung entrapment operation mismo. Hindi rin biro yung actual na pag-provide ng service doon sa bata to ensure na ma-process yung trauma na kanyang na-experience and mabigyan siya ng pagkakataon to go back to society and hopefully live a normal life despite what happened.
Well, there are proposals to improve or to give a boost to our adoption system. Para nga sa ganitong mga bata, no? Are you supporting that proposal? Is your group or is any other group pushing for the adoption of a law that will promote child adoption?
Meron na po, ang pagkakaalam ko ho, Ma'am Ami, ay meron na po tayong foster care system na kung saan maaaring ang qualified na families ay mag-adopt ng survivors. Sa ngayon ho, meron namang mga sumusuporta. Siguro at sa personal level ho, mainam na ma-explore ang ano na ito, ang option na ito. Kasi in some cases, ang bata ho ay, for example, alam na sa community na na-rescue siya, uy, anak siya na ganito, na nakakulong. There's a certain stigma that surrounds that kind of ano. So I think it's just fair that a child is given another chance to live right after all of that through with another family na capable siyang protektahan at suportahan.
Napanggit niyo kanina yung all the different branches of government that have to come into play, DOJ, NBI, DSWD. In a way, when you talk about national level departments, then at least you can imagine that that can be top down and there can be easy buy-in there, even easy investment. Pero nabanggit niyo yung LGUs. And pagka pinag-uusapan natin ng local governments, iba-iba yung kapasidad. Hindi po ba? Not just in terms of delivery, not just in terms of protection, even in terms of appreciation of the problem. What are the challenges for addressing the problems as we go down to the LGU levels, not just the municipal levels, not just provincial, all the way to the barangay levels?
Number one, based on experience, sir, not only appreciation but acknowledgement that this is a problem. Kasi some of the LGUs might be defensive na ay hindi naman, sure ba na sa amin yan? Parang hindi naman taga sa amin ang mga batang yan. Or hindi naman namin alam na may na-rescue. And it's really difficult to work in enhancing the child protection system if wala pong buy-in from the LGU. So far, sa amin pong mga nakakatrabaho na LGU, napaka-supportive. So the work, although OSAIC is a very unpleasant and heavy issue to work on, since nandoon ang commitment, madali ho for Save the Children to work with these LGUs. But we can imagine how hard it is if you go to the barangay or you go to the city and they deny that there is no problem, then wala po talaga tayong magagawa about the issue. Ang hirap po umusap.
Why do they deny? I mean, what's the ano yung barrier doon to even just acknowledging? Is it just pride? Is it just I mean, what's behind the denial?
It could be that first of all, hindi talaga nila alam that there is an issue. When we go down to certain areas and we talk to them, nagugulat pa nga sila. Or they even ask us or the DSWD, ano yung basis nyo? Bakit nyo sinasabi na pang ganito tayo? Or bakit nyo sinasabi na marami tayong cases? Second, I would say that it would be pride, no? Kasi some of our partners who acknowledge that this is a problem would really say na as much as nakakahiya na nangyayari ito sa aming area, hindi naman pwedeng wala kaming gawin. So I think I would say that it's both po.
There were reports no, that during the COVID lockdowns, lumala tong problema. Now we're preparing for the in-person classes, the resumption. No? What are you hoping to see by way of preventing this problem? Sa schools, what can the schools do?
We're really hoping and we will work on getting the support of schools. Ang amin hong mga projects sa Save the Children who work on OSAEC also work with schools, no? So gusto na namin na makuha yung buy-in ng schools na kasi nandun na yung mga estudyante, nandun na yung target audience natin. Na bigyan tayo ng panahon to discuss this. And pag-strengthen ng capacity ng teachers. Kasi kapag nag-raise tayo ng awareness, most possibly meron at merong masishare ang mga estudyante or ang parent. And who else to share to but si guidance counselor or si teacher. So we should also capacitate them para alam nila how to handle and more importantly, alam nila kung paano i-refer yung mga ganitong cases.
Yeah, but April, looking back at the start of this crisis, kasi itong mga nababanggit natin na tumaas yung mga incidents during the pandemic, this is not just hindsight. A lot of people were also warning as we were going into online classes and universally, everybody stay at home, learn from home, remote learning, and so on. There were people who were flagging and warning that this might be an unintended consequence of everybody going online. Looking back, did we prepare enough? Did we acknowledge that enough as we sent our children to school online at the start of this crisis? Was that built into the curriculum? For example, safe behavior. Was this incorporated and discussed enough?
I would say sa nangyari ho, based on our experience, we could have done better. Marami hong naging aspects kung bakit biglang, sinasabi na biglang lumobo kasi nga maraming nawalan ng trabaho and they say that this is easy money. Pero in terms of actually preventing this from happening, marami hong naging restrictions si COVID why hindi ito nabigyan ng attention that our partners may have wanted to. For example, when we checked with our partner LGUs or sa barangay, kahit sa barangay, sasabihin nila ang hirap kasi for us to go out kasi may restrictions tayo. So, how will we receive reports? Parang nangangapa, lahat ay nangangapa. Paano natin i-check kung okay ba ang mga bata? The teachers as well ay online lang nila nakikita yung mga bata. Yung iba nga, dahil module lang, si parent lang yung kukuha, hindi na nila nakakamusta personally ang bata. Kumusta ka sa bahay? Okay ka naman ba? Nakakaano ka ba sa pag-aaral? So I would say that in general, we could have done better to prepare this. In speaking of pagtuturo, we could also, nandito na ho, may marami pong stakeholders na may mga resources and willing magturo about this. It's just a matter of doing it extensively and getting the support of the schools and the communities para humapabilis ang pag-raise ng awareness tungkol sa issue nito.
Well, speaking of the communities, ano yung mga problema doon? Kasi ngayon, we're opening up, wala ng restrictions, no? Ang problema naman, siyempre, yung kultura natin ayaw yung sabihin, ay bakit ka ba nakikialam dito, to mga marites na to? Masyadong ano. How do you deal with that kind of attitude? If you're detecting na, mukhang tong kapitbahay ko, may problema, mukhang inaabuso yung anak. What can you do in that situation?
Ma'am, yan ho ang isa sa challenge namin. Even when we started the project and we interviewed parents, they understand that it is a form of exploitation. Alam nila kasi yung kapitbahay nila na rescue, but they gusto nilang mag-hands off kasi they think it's a family matter.
Yes.
And second, natatakot silang mag-report kasi baka balikan raw sila nung ni-report nila. So what we do at the community level is we aim to make the community, the parents understand na isa po itong form of exploitation. Hindi po ito para lang kumita na pansamantala kumita ng ilang libo at ilang hundreds. Buhay po ng bata ang nakataya. And hindi na po natin mababawi yung trauma na madudulot ng abuse sa kanya. We also assure the communities na pag nag-report po kayo, obligado ho ang tao na tumanggap ng report ninyo to keep it confidential. Kung gusto niyo maging confidential na kayo ang nag-report, dapat kong i-keep confidential yan, police, ng barangay, para hindi po kayo balikan. So, really, that's one of the, sabihin natin, existing na social norm na gusto natin baguhin.
And April, final question na lang. Let's get to that detail. Paano nga ba magre-report ang mga kababayan natin kung may napapansin silang problema?
Ayan, kung meron pong mga ganitong klase ng kaso na sa tingin natin ay nangyayari sa ating community, pwede hong magsumbong sa ating barangay, sa Barangay Council for the Protection of Children. Pwede hong dumiretso sa kanila. Bawat barangay ho ay meron pong DCPC focal na tinatawag. Pwede rin ho tayong lumapit sa malapit na ating police station and to the DSWD. So, alam ho nila na sila ho ay obligated to respond to your reports. So, pwede po tayong lumapit sa kanila for any child protection issue, including OSA.
Meron bang hotline, meron bang email address, Facebook page man lang na madaling matatandaan ng mga tao?
Meron hong existing na, meron hong mga hotlines, ang aling police. Apologies, I was not able to prepare the numbers, but meron hong hotline numbers. Ang aling police, meron din ho silang Facebook page. So yan ho ay initiative ng Women and Children Protection Center. Pwede rin hong magsumbong sa, again, pinakamalapit niyo na barangay para kung ano man ho, yung hotlines kasi usually ay national level and i-refer din to the areas kung saan ang nag-report. So best po if alam natin kung sino yung focal, ano yung numero ng ating mga local police stations and barangay as well as the SWD.
And I imagine if they want just access to those details, just in case hindi nila matandaan, they can also see these details on the Facebook page of Save the Children?
Yes po, we actually prepared at the start of the pandemic list of hotlines, but we can have that reposted po dahil meron na tayong law to remind people na meron pong malalapitan.
Okay. Maraming salamat. April Correa is spokesperson for Save the Children. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming
Thank you,
salamat po.
Victoria.
And that's it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.